crisis. It is time for transformation. The death of the narrative brings confusion, chaos, and struggle. There are moments in consciousness when things become fluid, when patterns change, and in these moments, the ripples of even a single idea can make a huge difference, change the whole wave of consciousness, and evolve the reality. It's quite normal to fear what one most desires. We desire to transcend the story of the world that has come to enslave us and indeed is killing the planet. We fear what the end of the world will bring, the demise of much that is familiar. Fear it or not, it is happening already. How do we change the world? Change the story. Welcome to the Infinite Imaginarium.
So, I mean, back in the 1980s,
Right.
you were working on one of the, if not the first interface for dial-up
Yes.
telephony, dial-up networking
Dial-up
systems.
networking. So Shiva Corporation, where you could have your Macintosh at home, you'd have your modem. Remember modems? Exactly.
Yeah.
And they would dial into the networking to be able to use the files and print. And my God, people were like, "Oh, wow, this is fantastic."
Do you think we were fooling ourselves to think that we could flip the product of the military-industrial complex into the new home for human consciousness?
So for a period of time we did, and this is one of the interesting things. When I entered the field of virtual reality, which is just after all of this happened, the technology had all been driven by the military simulation systems, Evans and Sutherland being the sort of big example of this. And what happened was the PlayStation. And the PlayStation is this pivot point where the driving force in all of this technology was no longer military investment, but consumer and entertainment investment. So in some ways, we actually are already and have been since about 1995 in that realm. In terms of being able to take the technology, I think what we need to ask is, what have we made with that opportunity?
What have we made with that opportunity? I mean, I feel like we've made a giant vacuum cleaner, that's great at extracting time, energy, and money from the humans and delivering it into abstracted corporate share prices.
So we have done that. Now, I was at this big event in Silicon Valley on Sunday for the 50th anniversary of something called the Mother of All Demos. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, this is this one event that happened on December the 9th, 1968. It was a demo. You can see the demo on YouTube because it was all recorded. And during this demo, you see the first copy and paste, you see the first hyperlink, you see the first video conferencing, and to run it all, you see the first mouse. This is all revealed in one demo. Douglas Engelbart, the father of the mother of all demos. Some of the people who created them are still alive. And I bring this up because there's a way of thinking of that as a starting point to everything that we have in the world today. And we're talking to bunches of people, of course, over the course of the day about the world that has been created by this. And there's a lot we can say that's quite negative about what we've created. But there's this one example that everyone keeps on coming back to. And when I say the word, you'll know exactly what I mean by it, because it's the good example. It's our touchstone, which is Wikipedia. Right? Exactly. You knew what I was going to say before I said it. And it was interesting because we need more than one touchstone, but it's a really good touchstone. And it's a really good touchstone in part because there's a benevolent dictator on it who basically resolves all of the unresolvable conflicts, because the formation of knowledge and taxonomies is this deeply human process. It's not automated. And that's one reason why Wikipedia is Wikipedia and not Google, because it, in fact, tends away from automation. It tends toward Team Human to produce something that is profoundly and deeply a human expression of knowledge, and has been resistant to all of the tampering and all of the hoovering as a result. I think we could probably learn something from that.
It is a hands-on craft.
The further in we go, the more human it becomes. This is the thing I think we're learning about technology, is that technology is a tool, it's useful, But what the tool reveals is it amplifies our strengths and our weaknesses. And it's really only in the last 4 years that the tool has reached the kind of scale that our weaknesses have been so fully displayed, other than YouTube comments, and we all know about those, because that was clear from years ago, and the darker corners of using it. But in the real sense of billions of people being caught up in these feedback loops that were feeding them the things that were either very good or very bad, these are the things that have become very present over the last 4 years.
Oh yeah, I thought a lot about stuff, and had a couple of deep philosophical rants with some comrades up here leading into this program to sort of kick open some doors. And I'd probably start with time, like Nikki was talking about transcending time, and I think as digitally the environments become more immersive, the way we observe time functionally will become less normal for a lot of people, especially for young people born into understanding computers as a natural resource. I think once we start donning the VR goggles and like our instead of holding a laptop anymore with a little clock in it, when we're doing gaming or doing probably social media will be sort of like The Sims. I see that probably not too far off in the near future. I see dating kind of happening virtually, and just sort of bouncing from, you know, cafe to cafe, and sort of living without, you know, moving and doing the things that, you know, we need to do now, apart from probably breaking down from necessity for sustenance. So I definitely think that that's something that draws a lot of questions to me in regards to where a digital environment will lead us in how we observe time.
Right, and the only way to mitigate the effect of the feedback loops, the power law dynamics, is these precise opportunities for human intervention. So in
precise and extremely broad. In other words, we all need to be thinking about this as part of our normal lives, is that these interventions don't belong to a single human, not a Jimbo Wales,
right,
or Doug Rushkoff or Mark Pesce, but in fact they're about all of us intervening in interesting, meaningful, important ways all of the time. That this is part of our political life in a connected world, that it's part of our common life in a connected world.
Well, and that's why pressing pause is a political act.
Yes. Pressing pause, creating a space, finding the other as you're talking about it, which is finding the country person rather than the city person, or if you're the country person, finding the city person, and then pausing to be, right, rather than assuming. And I feel as though one of the traps that we've fallen into is that we never get beyond our filters. We never look beyond what our expectations of what people are thinking or saying, and they're just as likely to feed out whatever party line that they've been fed in without pausing or thinking or responding to the actual person.
Right, but the moment you pause, that's anathema to the market. Wait a minute, you paused? You're not consuming? You're not producing? This is lost GNP in the pause. Stop the pause. You know, it
might cool things down a bit, huh?
Yeah, are you a Marxist or something? Stop pausing.
But I'm thinking, it might cool things down in the broader sense because things are heating up.
Yeah.
So maybe pausing is not a bad strategy to cooling things down a little bit. And I think maybe cooler heads are called for in this very broad and specific sense.
Right, but the technologies are really good at making us feel bad for pausing or preventing pause, because you're going to miss this. I mean, instead, much less than pausing, If we could even just get people to do 1 or 2 things at a time, rather than 8, they would stand a chance of being conscious.
What we can manifest out there could be anything. It could be negative, it could be positive, it could be escapism, or hopefully when we come more towards ourselves, the more you try to escape, you kind of like find yourself coming back to yourself. So like the more I try to suppress my emotions of, I don't give a fuck, I don't care, and a lot of times I do this in relationships to protect myself from getting hurt, is the more that I feel that, the more that it comes to me. And the people that give that illusion that they don't care are the ones that feel probably the most. So the more we try, which we're all collectively doing, is being desensitized from the war in the Middle East, or the environment crisis, or the economic crisis, everything that's going on, the more that we detach from it, the more it comes back for us to slap us in the face. I used to use this phrase in my poetry, banging my head against reality. Every time I tried to ignore certain things within me, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more I was banging my head against reality. Like, reality has its way, and so your inner emotions and your feeling, your eternal compass of beauty comes and hits you back in the face. What I hope, or what I think is going to happen, because what I see is more and more of this story changing. So no longer, and there's still going to be people that use this technology to escape, but like 3D printing, why can't we use that to build permaculture housing? Why can't we use the technology to have a autonomous garden that is self-sustaining, and what open source ecology is doing, using permaculture designs? And I think the task also at this point is not only that the information has to be deep and real, but it also has to be attractive. And like what I was saying, what that came to me in a dream, why can't we say something deep and have a dope ass beat? Like those shouldn't be mutually exclusive. And a lot of times what I'm seeing and where we're getting stuck, and what it was is trapping our development right now, is that we view everything as the bottom line, or as the economy, about money, and we forget that money is just a means to an end, and it's not an end in itself. And every time we view it as an end in of itself, we get stuck in there, and we do things like what I see mostly happening with journalism right now, or YouTube, or everything that's kind of getting marketed on the internet, is that they're doing it with the intention to have clickbait, to sell. And that's like, it's not this, for me, I don't view it as this like evil conspiracy of these people. Like, there's probably a few people that are trying to manipulate the world, but the mass majority of people are just having this kind of instinctive survival, like, oh, I have to do this catchy story, and so they do clickbait type of stories. And this is where the quote unquote fake news, because even mainstream media, I don't think the majority of them are not that nefarious. And then I like Douglas Rushkoff, like majority of these elite people, I don't think they're smart enough to pull this off. But it's more that they just have a wrong perspective of how it is. They're just, what's happening with Google is they're trying to expand their stock shares without building a sustainable, like they're viewing it, how do we make money, instead of how do we empower people? How do we spread ideas? How do we make a more sustainable world, instead of just looking at themselves and saying, how do we get the stock price of Google to rise? And same thing with Facebook. How do we make our stock prices and our value of our company greater? And then while we have to be more mainstream and go to like, the lowest common denominator or whatever, and then they do these grand schemes of things, and like the road of hell is paved with the best intentions. But why can't we just flip that and say, what can we do that could help make a more sustainable economy, make a more empower more people? We have information at our fingertips, but we're not necessarily using it. One of the good things that I read, and it talks about art. Art is something that you just do in art class. Being creative is something you do as an artistic skill. But art critical value is to develop learners that are creative, curious, and develop ideas and play and have fun with it. So shifting the perspective and focusing 3 critical habits that the artist employs, and it's the comfort with ambiguity. And I think that's something that I know I'm kind of ambiguous when I speak, or even when I'm trying to say something, because like I said, my mind has changed a lot with certain experiences and certain things that I read, and even consciously I have tried to do that. But being comfortable in this ambiguity of having this relative perspective is about where you are in that given moment in time and when you experience the art piece. What it means to you one day might not mean the same thing the next day, and it's fine with that. You don't have to always say that this is what is and this is what it always is going to be. Then to be able to generate ideas, new ideas, and also be critical and say what ideas are maybe productive or not productive. And I think the one important thing that we all are going to have to do with the more technology comes in, but the transdisciplinary research, meaning that we're making connections between science, art, sociology, psychology, and I'm blending the specialties together and having the more abstract view of things. And this is where we need to get our minds at, because right now, we already have the technology to transform the world. We are just short on visions of that. We're short of people seeing the big picture and being able to make the abstract connections of this mosaic of ideas that are out there and connecting them together. This is kind of what I saw. So right now, like Facebook, the problem with Facebook's algorithms is they're trying to sell you something, right? And trying to influence you for what you want so you could buy and consume. What about if we flip that? What about if we give you what you need based on your interests to help empower you to grow it and do what you want? Because, like we already have stuff pinged, and like we have all this metadata, huge amount of metadata. And what are we using the metadata for? Is one, selling it to advertisers so they could sell you more stuff and spam you with stupid shit on your email, and looking for subgroups that are going against the mainstream corporate society. So all the fringe groups are getting flagged and tagged. But what about we use that metadata for actual organizing our resources, saying, okay, instead of like trying to sell you something, try to empower you so you create and be more sustainable. And so instead of extracting your value, it's giving you value so you could grow that value exponentially. And this is where the flip of everything has to go, or I believe it's actually going to go. Kind of that thing what I said in the beginning. We're afraid of what the end of the story will bring, the demise of that which is familiar. Fear it or not, it is happening already. This is already happening. And the better we could adapt to that, the more progress we can make. And I think a lot of the crisis is with our inability to adapt towards that. But the developments never happen, I think, on the mainstream. They're always at the edges, and the art and good ideas always die in the mainstream, I think.
So I think societally now, any developing thought form is first assessed for its functionality in militarization, for how can it be used as either weaponized or used as a matter of defense or getting the upper hand on information, and then immediately thereafter it's placed in the realm of intellectual property, and so it's commodified and turned into, what can we get for it, like you were saying, Daniel. It's not, there's no common good in it. And I wonder, like Nikki was saying, about how the if I'm in the city and everyone's having their lunch and they're all taking their turn with their phone, pulling up a shocking this or an ostentatious that, and that type of thing. And you see it in school, the viral video, but you never see anyone like doing an act of kindness or look at this amazing, sunset or anything like that. That would just be like not nearly interesting enough. But it kind of makes me wonder, as people, if we're transcending the digital age and we're seeing, okay, the wild places are down to 20% on the earth, and like we're kind of talked about before, when will that shift sort of take place where, like you say, Dan, the technological aspect of the creative process, that when we tap into our imagination and we create purely from going into the Akashic field and drawing out, I firmly believe humans just regurgitate. I don't, people are so full of themselves to think that they create thoughts. They may assemble logos in a certain way. They may have a specific tangent of creativity that's inherent to them and not others. But my take on the human condition is that you're only pulling pieces out, and your ability to find, like you said, Dan, that quiet space within you to have these things populate in your mind is really the magic. That's the magic of the human condition. I believe we're here to learn humility and to understand abundance. And digitally, like you can't smell a flower. I'm assuming we can get wet wired and like activate things that tell us what something would smell like, but then there'd still be a computer sending a signal saying, this is what this smells like. So I think it's, when we're transcending the digital age, I think you get these, you see those videos and you go, oh my gosh, that's disgusting, or whatever, and slowly what the yearning starts to come out. And this is one important part where I don't know how much further it can go militarizing everything for society. I don't know how much further it can go commercializing everything for society. Like everything on the earth is inherently free, and it doesn't hold, it's infinitely valuable. It has no limitations to what it's worth today. It will always be worth more for new minds. It will always be some new, wonderful, look at that incredible thing moment, just as equal in the human condition as the ostentatious, rant or explosive diarrhea or whatever else that tripped you out. And that's why I think the social contract about where we go in transcendence and digital age is really critical to laying groundwork. And then the way we validate each other, how we pay each other, going into this new time where there's just going to be less to do. Like we're going to have to go to a basic income. more things as they automate, when we have driverless vehicles, and as these things happen, there's just no way we can all exist and not sort of take care of each other. And that's why I think that tied with all this suppressed science that's all coming forward, like the sand science and non-duality, that shows us where the digital age does not feed our spiritual side, I don't think. I mean, I think it could touch on it, but I don't think it can feed it. I think nature feeds our cohesive behavior to the earth. And I don't feel when I'm on Minds or if I'm reading books, I don't feel that connection to myself like I feel it when I'm looking at the mountains or making up decisions about what the clouds look like and things like that. So I definitely believe that there's no figurehead about truth anymore. Media was supposedly the truth, and the newspaper was supposedly the truth, and the news was supposedly the truth, and it proved to the world it was a lie. And I don't mean just like lightly, but like they fought it to the last breath of the Electoral College, and then they were all in this massive disbelief, and there's all this upheaval, but it sent this shockwave through North American culture. That where's the source? You saw that the next story that they put forward was fake news. Well, that's the pot calling the kettle black right out of the gate. And so there's no figurehead like my parents. In religion, there was all these things put forward about a way to conduct yourself under God, a moral contract to your neighbor that allowed society to right or wrong function with some mutual respect. There were all some sort of core values sort of instilled in everyone to some extent. And in the digital age, with so many things, potential truths being the case, you have to wonder, where do we hold truth then moving forward? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, actually, real quick, what you said, and this is the part of where I guess I'm still stuck on, and I guess I want to express that and emphasize that more of how I see it. For me, what I see, and the story that I want to bring out, it's not transcending the digital age, it's evolving the digital age. What I mean by that is what you were saying about the technology or whatever, right? And see, I know that, and this is part of the reason why, I always had this inherent instinct, and I told this to my friend once, that smartphones, as they stand right now, entrap consciousness. And it doesn't have to be that way, but right now that's how I feel about it. The way I use Minds, I have a computer and I use it just to kind of like create, but I don't like carry it with me. So when I go about my day, I'm focused in on whatever I'm doing. I always get like this weird look when I go out doing stuff, and like say when I go to like a baseball game with my family or some friends, I'm the only one, because you have to go through some metal detector, and they say, "Oh, take your cell phone out." And all the time, I always get the same question. It's like, "Oh, excuse me, sir, where's your cell phone?" I was like, "Oh, I don't have one." So I'm like the only one that's always focused on whatever's going on in that moment, or I try to be. Sometimes I'm lost in my thoughts, depending on where I am, trying to create something or not. But more times than not, I try to always be present wherever I'm at. And it's hard, it's hard enough without having a cell phone to do that. And I know my own personality, and I always would hate me kind of like looking at it. But why can't we have this technology, which you're saying, smelling a rose? Why can't it help us enhance our already senses of taste, touch? It already enhances our sight. Like the reason we know how vast and beautiful the cosmos is because of our telescopes, because of our satellites, because of we've been out on spaceships, and the same reason why we know that there's no distinction between where do the skin and the atmosphere begins, and that it's not as clear cut as it is, even to the point where we got to trying to find the building blocks of what makes matter, and we're finding that it's this ocean of possibilities more than a solid current thing. So all of this stuff, that even though we have the separation, we have this expansion of our consciousness. It has enhanced our senses, and that's the story that I feel we should focus on. That's the story that we need to put the dope as beat to, of how is it going to enhance our experience of the moment right now. We go about our days a day, and we have our work. And I remember too, when I would get really beat down with going to school and working full time in the kitchen. I mean, I would get in, and I'll get in these ruts where, all I'm doing is work, and then all I want to do is not think, and then I'll go and go to the bar, or I'll watch some mindless TV or smoke weed or whatever, and that's what I would do. But I would never get that fulfillment of what I really wanted to do, is to be able to be curious, creative, and to think, but also to, at the same time, to be able to just be, to be able to sit down. And this is a lot of time too what I learned, smoking weed and with psychedelics. And I actually wanted to say this about the crisis that we're in, right? About the truth, and everybody kind of having this psychic break of where they don't want to accept it, or whatever it is. This is a lot like what I would go through with my friends whenever I would give them psychedelics, and they would have, quote unquote, a portion of it as a bad trip, and they would say, I felt like I was dying. And I remember a lot of times when I would talk to them or kind of coach them through this, they were holding on to their identity, or holding on to some kind of self or idea. A lot of times it would have to do with their family. I remember this one time I was talking to my friend, and he was kind of freaking out, and I was like, "What's going on, Gabriel?" I was like, because I could feel it. I could feel that you're not all right. And it's fine if you want to be in there, I'll leave you alone. But I also want to express to you that I'm here for you. And then he was like, I don't know. And then he started telling me that he was thinking about his parents, and he's having problems with them. He loves them, but they don't understand him. And he goes on and on and on about kind of the typical thing, that you're at a different place and you want to express that to your loved ones, but they're not at the same page as you. And there's this kind of conflict. And so I'm talking to them. I'm like, okay, whatever, all you're feeling is, I feel it too. But let me tell you something right now. All of that, you're over there. We were in San Diego. You're over there in San Gabriel Valley at your parents' house, about your family and stuff like that. And you're not here with us, with your friends, and on this beautiful beach and experiencing everything that we have right here. You're not letting go of all that baggage, all that stuff, all of those, the kind of local truth is dissolving in front of you, and you don't want to let it go. So you're not accepting the new perspective. So there's this lag, there's this glitch that is happening. And it's like, why don't you let that go and come here where we're at, where we're communing with each other, where you could feel the pulse of Gaia. I always have this experience of feeling the land beneath me pulse like a heartbeat, and me feeling like I'm just a little cell within Gaia, our mother. And this is always my experience of it. And I don't know, I never really had that crisis of where I felt like I was dying, I guess because of for whatever reason. I've always kind of accepted that and never really fought it in that sense. I have had other stuff where I have problems with let's say the outside world, but I don't know, I always felt comfortable with that. And so this is the problem, this post-truth world is not necessarily as Armageddon as we think of it. I don't think it has to be that way. I think the more we get comfortable and I think this is what we have to more accept. Nietzsche said it is like, there's no facts, there's only interpretations. We're so easy to see everybody else's bias, but not see our own bias. And the more we look into our own bias, the more I think we could grow. First personally, and then collectively. Like, the more I get empowered, and the more I share that with you guys right here in Infinite Imaginarium, the more I share it on Minds, the more this new story grows, and the more it becomes its own little pocket of perception and reality. So the more I invest that out of however I express it, the more you express your interpretation of it. And we don't always have to see eye to eye. We use different languages, different words, and we have different interpretations. But the more I get comfortable with saying, I don't have to always hold on to my own bias. I could let go of that and see and put on a different lens. And I get strengthened by having different lenses, because then I'm able to make more connections. I'm able to expand my expression, my creativity. I'm able to make this mosaic of minds that I've talked about since the beginning of the Minds panel show. And I really do see the best stuff that I have seen for this new story of expressions are these collaborative videos of these mashups of different things. I'm not saying psychedelics are the answer because it comes with a lot of stuff. Like, there is, if you're not ready for it, there's also the dark night of the soul, and that could be too heavy for a lot of people to process. And I'm still processing it, and that's why. But a lot of times, these experiences that we're having are these experiences of popping our bubbles, and our response to these bubbles. And this is what psychedelics does, but it doesn't have to be necessary like that, where we expand. Like, what happens on Minds is that I meet someone like Nikki from England, and I meet Kevin from Canada. I met people from Australia. Especially in the beginning of Minds, no one I actually knew in everyday life is anybody I talked to. I've met Kevin, and I've met Gus Spiders and Travis Lee and Stone Archer, but that's very minimal, of like all the people that I interact with, people in Texas. And so I have always viewed the world from like the TV or what I see on YouTube or reading articles or reading books, but now I have actual connections to someone that's there somewhere out there, the others around the world. And the more that I interact with them, and you're open to this, the more connection, the broader your perspective really gets. There's one thing, and this, I think, and this is kind of always, Nikki, I remember your dream of us taking this on the road. I think this is where the technology could help facilitate that actual of us taking this adventure and taking the Infinite Imaginarium on the road. And that's where it should always it should be this feedback loop of how do we organize this world, this whole big old complexity, and make it the best, most colorful, loving story that we can make it. Right now, no one knows what it is, and the majority of the story are nothing but like shit jokes and with very base level stuff. But it doesn't have to be that way. But yeah, you want to talk about your dream you had that one time?
Oh, one of the things while I'm thinking of it, something that keeps popping into my head, which is kind of contradictory to what we've been saying about being connected, is the fact that a lot of people are very frightened of being just alone with their own thoughts. So their whole life is basically a quest to distract themselves from themselves, if that makes sense, which sounds completely nonsensical really when you think about it. The whole quest is to stimulate the brain through some form of it, like they go to work, and then when they come home they put the TV on and they watch some kind of music show or game show, like the X Factor type thing at the weekend or whatever. Everything is about some kind of stimulation, and there's still a lot of people that are terrified of just being on their own. If they had a situation where they're normally with the family and then something crops up where their husband or their wife has to go off and they take the children, so they're just suddenly on their own, they're like, oh God, who can I ring up? Who can I be with? I mean, I've got friends now that I speak to, and if a situation arises in their life where they have to be on their own, they panic and they're like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have anybody around me, or I better invite this person around, or make sure that I've got somebody with me, because they're sort of terrified of being on their own, where they might actually have to think about things in a different format. And the weird thing about being connected is that you have to start off by being alone in order to become connected, which sounds really weird, because how can you be connected if you're alone? But you have to be alone first, get to know yourself without all the external stimulation, which is what meditation is. And I think some people, you get one half of people that are desperately trying to be connected. They're trying all these techniques, they're going on all these spiritual quests and paying for these spiritual courses and online courses, or they go off to a retreat somewhere to learn something and take ayahuasca and do all this stuff. But when in actual fact it's quite simple. They don't necessarily have to pay to do all those things. They could just be alone with themselves one day. They don't have to actually physically think, right, I'm going to do this specific meditative position, sat on a cushion with my legs crossed with a certain type of music playing. Usually meditation or getting in tune with yourself comes naturally when you're doing something that you enjoy doing. So it could just be that you're listening to some music that you really like. Lots of people meditate and they don't even realize they're doing it. They're just, naturally going with the flow. They are at that moment connected with everything around them. But yeah, also I just feel that people need to try and overcome the fear of being on their own, being alone with their thoughts, because everything that a person has makes up their identity. So it might be their job, their name. It could be a family name that, this family name means a specific thing to me. So, the amount of money somebody's got, what material possessions they might have. A lot of these things contribute to an identity of somebody, how they identify who they are, which is why in the past, if people suddenly lose all those things overnight, like in the Great Depression in the 1920s, a lot of wealthy people lost huge amounts of what would have defined who they were as an individual sort of overnight. And as a result of that, they couldn't handle being completely stripped down to the bare bones and then being forced to look at themselves without all of those things that they once had that made them the person that they were, or gave them an identity. And as a result of it, because they couldn't handle that stripping down, that in itself, going back to the psychedelics, would be likened to a really bad trip, being completely stripped of your identity and being forced to sort of look in the mirror at who you actually are, or where your spirit is at that moment in time. And a lot of people couldn't handle that, and as a result of that, they decided to eliminate themselves, through suicide or whatever, because they couldn't handle the intensity of having to look at themselves. And I think there's still a lot of people around like that now, you know, that I think if they were stripped of all of that and forced to look at themselves, they probably wouldn't be able to cope with it, because they're not sort of at a level where they can deal with it. Some people, you know, they're sort of on the verge, so they can just about handle it, but it's not easy. So they can use the experience in a positive way and evolve from it, but other people can't, you know, wouldn't be able to cope with it. And I think quite often as well, some people will have, you know, with the psychedelics, they'll have a bad trip because they're not quite going back to what we were discussing in the dark night of the soul. They need to go there first. It's kind of like that thing when they say you need to hit rock bottom so you can go up and evolve from there. You have to visit the dark place. You have to be in that dark environment so you can sort of see beyond it, or that you can create the light. You know, it kind of forces you into a situation to create something. You're forced into a situation because you've got nowhere else to go. It's kind of, you're in the worst possible place, and it will kind of push them to the limits, but they'll be able to sort of come through it in the end. But yeah, it just got me thinking that a lot of these things that happen to us in our lives are a bit like a bad trip, in the sense that we're forced to strip everything off and look at ourselves in a completely bare fashion, without all the external distraction and all the rest of it. You know, we've suddenly got to look at ourselves, and it's quite a frightening thing for people to go through. And I think that's why people want this constant stimulation. So yeah, I think with the internet and everything, technology, we can use those things, like you were saying, Dan, rather than feeling the need to transcend the digital era. We can evolve it, you know, we can use it. We don't have to eliminate it. We can use it in a positive way. But I was also remembering what you said, Kevin, about, you know, there's no substitute for connecting with nature, getting into that meditative state by, you know, when you're in nature, if you're just like lying in a park surrounded by trees and you're just looking into the sky, and you just go into that mode of calm, and everything flows, thoughts just flow through your mind. I often get it if you're just sort of lying in sunshine, for some reason, gazing at the sun, like, you know, maybe not gazing right at it, but even if you've got your eyes closed and you can sort of see that warm glow. So rather than darkness, you've just got this kind of orange hue. I often find that just lying in the sunshine, you get this stream of thoughts and ideas flowing. And I think definitely that is the surefire way of connecting to the Akash, or your human Akash, but then the actual collective Akashic record, where you can just tap into that information and literally pull out ideas and information. Because quite often I've been doing that, sort of just laying in the sun, and all these things are going through my brain, you know, just free flowing ideas and concepts, ideas for books and sometimes visual images for artwork that I want to create. Literally just like somebody's turned a tap on, it's just flowing through. And then I'll somehow break that mode, the phone will ring, and I'll, you know, say if I was lying in my garden and I'm getting into that mode, and then the phone will ring and it will break that flow. I'll get up and go into the house, and then I'll forget sometimes what I'll think to myself, I just had all that, I had a really good idea for something, and now it's just completely gone. A bit like when you've been asleep and you've had a really amazing dream, and you wake up, and for about 2 minutes of opening your eyes, you remember the dream really clearly. And then literally after 2 minutes, you know, so you get to the third minute or half of the third minute, 30 seconds, and it's completely gone. And you remember that you had this dream, you remember that it was epic or that it had this amazing message, but you suddenly can't remember what the dream was. And it can literally be the difference of a minute. You know, a minute ago you remembered it, now you don't. but yeah, what you were saying, Kevin, about being in nature, there's something magical, really magical in terms of what that word means, that when you're in and amongst nature, that somehow connects us to the source. And I think obviously the source is Gaia. Gaia is the source of the information coming to you. So when you're actually in direct contact with Gaia, whether it's that you're walking along a beach, so you're actually touching the earth. I think that's probably what it is. You're completely connected to it. So yeah, definitely I would say that is the only way that we can connect in. And the technology is definitely a positive tool to enlighten people to a point where they can go and do that for themselves. So I think it can all be used in a positive way.
I'd just like to tap in on that just real quick. So there's tiers to that level of observation, and this is the thing that, I'm using image therapy on minds to spurn curiosity and to evoke emotions about other non-human living things, and it's something that in a city, if you go to a park, as you mentioned, Nikki, like you have these consciousness around you. You perhaps maybe haven't made an entanglement like we have, where how once you have an intimate mental connection with someone, things happen instantaneously and directly. And anywhere you could go in England, I would imagine there's not too far you could go where you wouldn't run into a road or another human. When I just traveled from New Mexico through Colorado, there are vast open spaces, but still always somewhere communities and people. And here I live literally on the edge of civilization. Like, I go 5 minutes and there's only the road that you're on for hundreds of miles of just trees and mountains and rivers and lakes, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square miles the further north you go of just little tiny pockets of humanity. And you tie so clearly into the human condition from interfacing on that level, because you realize you are alone. You are, just as you are, we are alone in our rooms communicating this way now. You realize out there, you're whatever you have with you or on you is what you have to accomplish what you're doing or where you're going. And it exposes part of life to you that you really kind of need that separation to experience. And that I get, when we talk about the infinite Imaginarium Ranch, I have the dream, and I focus on the dream all the time about being able to bring people here and feed them organic food and just give them opportunities to learn and participate in growing food and touching the earth, like you said, Nikki, and showing them just the spaces and the air and the wildlife and the smells. And it's such an intimate immersion of your true self. I don't know how digitally we're going to provide that, and if the young people now who've always only known connectivity and technology, I wonder how is that the dividing line? Is that the point where there's two camps, where the naturalist and the technologist, as a lot of fiction has put forward to us? Or like Daniel says, are we going to evolutionize our digital life, and with all of this Internet of Things and robotics and artificial intelligence and algorithms, are we going to just have so little necessity on our capacities that we're going to realize how critically important these last 20% of the undisturbed spaces, these last, tiny fraction of 36% of species diversity that's left, how really critical and how important it is. So we don't have to try to find a way to experience them within a digital environment. So that's why I'm always on about growing consciousness, so that you fall in love again, so that the Renaissance comes and we fall in love again with our Earth Mother. I just wanted to throw that in there.
The mystical experiences with psychedelics, which are similar to mystical experiences in other ways, and how that impacts social change. So it's like the political implications of the non-dual experience. And I want to start by really talking about how many of us perceive the current world situation. A lot of it is in a crisis, and Albert Einstein has said it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And I think that's really clear, that we have so much incredible scientific knowledge, but we don't have the spiritual and emotional maturity to handle it. And as a consequence, the environment's being destroyed. There's the potential of nuclear destruction. So how do we really handle the products of the mind that we have developed that are incredibly powerful? And there's some hints in the UNESCO Charter. It says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So what they're saying essentially is that it's psychological factors that are really what threaten the survival of the human race, the survival of the life on Earth, and that we have to find some way psychologically to bring about a healthier state. And Albert Einstein, again, has said the splitting of the atom has changed everything save our mode of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. What we shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive. Now, what is this new manner of thinking that he's talking about? And I think it is precisely the non-dual thinking. It's that recognition that underneath all of the different ways that we define ourselves in terms of our country, our religion, our race, our gender, our socioeconomic status, all the different ways that we draw our identity that also makes us and them distinctions. That if we can understand underneath all of that, that we're all together, that it's all one, then that will breed more tolerance, more understanding, and that's the new mode of thinking. And that's what we see is happening all over the world, this emphasis on globalization, but it's also coming into conflict with a lot of fundamentalism. And so how do we promote this new manner of thinking? And in the early 1980s, I was inspired by a book by Robert Mueller. And Robert Mueller was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, kind of the mystic of the United Nations. And this book was New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And you could see also the profound shift in consciousness that took place once we had images of the Earth from the moon. Once people could really understand that the planet was, a single system. And this book was really basically that thesis, is that we need this mystical experience that is anchored not in just a few people, but in millions and billions of people, and then we'll have a more peaceful world. And his book was inspiring, but he didn't say anything about psychedelics. And so I decided that I would write him a letter. And I was just a college undergraduate at the time. And I said, I'm really profoundly influenced by your book, but there is a lot of people who found this kind of spirituality through psychedelics. And right now that research is suppressed all over the world as part of the counter reaction against the 60s. I said, would you help to bring back psychedelic research from your position at the UN? And I told him a lot about the Good Friday experiment, which I'll tell you about in just a few minutes. And to my utter surprise, he wrote me back a handwritten note. And he said he would help, and that he did agree that it was important for science to use psychedelics to understand mystical experiences, and that from whatever he could do, he would help out. And through incredible coincidences, in 1984 and 85, MDMA was starting to be criminalized, and we were doing pretty well shutting them down and slowing DEA down in the United States, and they moved internationally through the WHO. And Stan's brother, Paul, was actually in charge of this committee that was reviewing the scientific evidence to make recommendations about whether MDMA and other molecules should be criminalized. And Robert Mueller arranged for me to go speak to the scientific advisor of that committee. And in a tremendous lone sort of heroism, Paul was the only one of that committee that voted against the criminalization of MDMA. And there was just a tiny little footnote in their report to the WHO about recommending the criminalization, and it said that Paul was worried that the criminalization would slow down the research, and that he got the committee to encourage the nations of the world to facilitate research into this most interesting substance. So what on the larger scale looked like a major defeat, that MDMA was recommended for criminalization all over the world, this little footnote eventually was used by the Swiss government in 1988 to resume research with psychedelics. And so sort of the lone critic standing up against the tide of history can make a difference, and Paul is a great example of that.
This is really the role of psychedelics. This is how the role I see plant medicine play in this revolution. Like there's a reason these plants are coming to every corner of the world. Ayahuasca is Incan technology, pre-Incan technology of the highest magnitude. And we would never turn down the use of the internet to send snail mail. We never, that's why, when someone says to me, well, I don't need ayahuasca, I meditate. And I'm like, you have access to a plant that is the emissary of Gaia, and its sole purpose is to speed up the evolution of human consciousness and to upgrade your software so you can have Gaia 3.0 or whatever, the equivalent of Capitan OS X. And you're going to choose not to do that. And the plants make that inner work much easier. And we've always had a symbiotic relationship with plants. They are not other. And so for me, it's like I humble myself to these plants and to nature. And I ask to do that work because I know doing that work is going to make me a better activist. It's going to make me better at fighting the superstructure. It's going to make me a better community member.
Oh, it's part of your practice.
It's part of the practice.
And where do you think they come from, these plants? Do you think... Terence McKenna used to talk about, there's mushroom spores or alien DNA. And what do you think's going on here?
Yeah, no, that's the ultimate metaphysical question.
I have trouble, talk about Jewish guilt or something. I have trouble even eating. Because you're chewing the life out of some other form.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, no, it is hard. No, it took me a long time to want to be here. I probably was 17 when I first accepted that actually I'm going to play this game in this incarnation. From a Sufi perspective, what we would say is God is an emergent phenomena. God is a metaphor for the universe. And God is everywhere, right? Allah is everywhere. So we are the universe unfolding on itself. And the universe wanted to feel this expression of what it is to be 7 billion humans, or the birds and the bees and the wind and et cetera, et cetera. And in some ways, our purpose is to help guide that evolution. And so I don't really believe in the New Age ideal that the universe is on path and everything's perfect. And there's a great Ram Dass line where he says, well, the universe is perfect, including my desire to change it. And that's sort of more my perspective, is more quantum physics perspective, which is we meet the universe halfway. There's no predestiny The old mystics were wrong about predestiny and providence, but there's also the Western rationalists were wrong. There's no pure agency. There's a meeting of the universe halfway that comes from intention, and it comes from entanglement, and it comes from context. And when we set our intention and we actually influence the ability of atoms to move in a certain way, and then our reaction, our observation, then changes the sort of multiverses of possibility. And the whole thing just happens at every moment simultaneously in this infinite progress or regress, or however you want to say it. And there's just infinite 0 points over and over and over.
Do you see human beings as having I hate to use a word like this, but a special place in this whole order?
I think part of the hangover from Darwinism and neo-Darwinism is the belief that human beings are the pinnacle, the culmination of life. And I don't believe that. I think we're the newest and youngest members of the family of life. But I feel that human beings play a central role as stewards, as a companion species. Yet, we somehow think we've evolved outside of our Gaian mother. We think that evolution for human beings is taking on some other trajectory, some other spin that is outside of life. And I think that's the most insane. I think that's actually a driver of a lot of our psychosis. And we were saying this earlier in our discussion here at CUNY with the Media Studies group, that when human beings went to the moon for the first time, Gaia saw herself differently than she ever could have, because we are Gaia and we were reflecting back this vision from the moon. And human beings are going to play a central role somehow in bringing Gaian life outside of the solar system. Our sun has a 10 billion year half-life. She's not going to be here forever. And the human beings that exist a billion years from now are going to be as different to us as we are from single-cell amoebas. We have no idea what they're going to be, which is why we have to preserve life and have to be pro-life, because whatever life exists at the, whatever we want to call the end of days or the eschaton or that moment 10 billion years from now, we are going to be its progeny and vice versa. And so we know we're hardwired to defend life. All life is. And there's a reason for that. And I do believe in some kind of teleological directionality. And, McKenna, to bring back McKenna, used to talk about this increase in complexity. And this is what complexity theory was about. Novelty is increasing, and it's increasing at an infinite rate. Even the speed of light is changing. The boiling point of elements are changing. And so, of course, there's a trajectory. And he used to say, we're in parking orbit of the eschaton, or one of those great McKenna-isms. And the eschaton being the Christian study of the end of times, eschatology. And we do feel that we're in parking orbit of some eschaton, of some major transcendental moment. It's around us, and humans are playing a role, and I really believe we've reincarnated here on Gaia in 2017 in 3D for a reason. I don't pretend to know that reason. And I think, the mystery of life is not a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to surrender to. And that's the role the plants play, and that's the role meditation plays, and that's the role any transcendental experience plays for me.